right, so let's get started. So this demo is an introduction to CAD Mapper and importing site context into your Rhino model. So the first thing we need to do is go to the CAD Mapper website. So you just Google cadmapper.com, and I'll send you the link to the website. There's the link. I just sent it in the chat. So the first thing you're going to need to do, and you'll notice I've also taken some screenshots and summarize the steps you need to take in order to import site context. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to hit the sign in button, and you are going to have to create an account. So I'm already logged in, but when you go to create your account, use your school email. Just general practice to use school email. You'll get discounts on everything. This is a free software, generally, so you won't have to pay anything to get any site context. But there is a caveat to that, so which I'll explain in a moment. So once you create your account and you log in, you will reach this page right here. And on the right here, you see a map. And basically, just like any other map, Google Maps, etc., you can look up a site location just by typing in an address. So for example, if I did the school, which I think is 1420 Henry Ave. Or I just could have done Thomas Jefferson University. That'll take you to that location. So here we have campus, but I'm going to go actually for this demonstration download the site context that I was showing before. And so this site that I'm using is actually a site of the new office space for the firm I work for during the day. We are designing a new office space that should be going up on South Street. So we searched our location. You can use an address or longitude and latitude if you know the coordinates of your site. And you'll see here that there is a box, and you can actually toggle that box to essentially create the boundaries of your site context. So right now, if I extend this box all the way out here, that means I will be exporting this much site information out of CAD Mapper. However, you cannot get too large with your site context. You'll notice here that as I made that area much larger, it has told me that I need to purchase the file, which we do not want to do. And anyway, for the purpose of this project, we definitely do not need this much site context. So there's two ways we can make that smaller. One is to zoom in on our site context, which my site will be located right here. So we could zoom in just by scrolling or by using the plus and minus button. And then we can also mess with the geometry of our boundary box. So that's all you need to do for identifying the site and the amount of site context that you want to extract from this website. Another number of key things you need to look out for are the settings that are located on the left hand of the screen. So you can actually download site context for any of these programs: AutoCAD, Rhino, SketchUp, ArchiCAD, etc. Of course, for this class, we're going to be using Rhino, so we can get 3D context. So In order to get not only the outlines of buildings and the outlines of streets, if we want three-dimensional context, we need to be sure to check the 3D building option as well as the topography option. By checking the topography option, you will actually also get the curvature and the ridges and valleys of the site context without having to model any of it yourself. Another thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to check set false height if no 3D data. And what that means is basically there are a lot of buildings, for example, here in Philadelphia, that CAD Mapper probably doesn't know, the geometry or the exact height of the building. You can see the ones here that are sort of shown in 3D and kind of protruding out of the map. Those are buildings that CAD Mapper recognizes as, understanding its height, etc. Anything that is basically flat like this, it doesn't really know how high these buildings are. So you can set by clicking this set false height if no 3D data. If you select that, you can essentially put in parameters for how many meters each of these building masses should be in height. If the software doesn't know what those building heights are. Of course, building heights vary. You're just gonna have to make an educated guess. And everything here is essentially going to be brought in at 9 meters. Under topography, we also have contours. And I would suggest selecting contours because that will give us each of the contour lines of the site. So you will not only be importing the actual sort of surface of the site, but also the lines that represent, if you are familiar with topography maps, the actual contour lines that make up that site. And lastly, here we have road geometry, and that is essentially how you want to bring in the actual roads. We have center lines, which essentially means that just the center line of each street will be brought in just as a line, no other information. Outlines basically brings in the outlines of the roads. It'll give actual dimension to the width of the roads. Or we can bring in the roads as mesh surfaces. So the roads themselves will be their own surfaces. I typically just use outlines just so that there's less data in the file, it's quicker to download, etc. And of course, you could always change the width of the roads. Highways, of course, would probably be much wider, etc., etc. But for the purpose of this demo, I'm not going to worry about that. So once we're done selecting all this information, all you're going to do is hit Create File. And we're going to wait for it to load. And so you see here, it'll give me a 3D axonometric view, and this is essentially the information that I'm going to be downloading. So I'm going to be getting all of this building context without having to model any of it. So now all I do is I hit download, and it will download as a zip file, which means I'm going to have to extract my file here. So let's open that zip file. Let's see here. Let me stop sharing my screen because I don't know that you guys can see my other screen here. All right, so here is the zip file or the program I use to extract zip files. I'll just hit that file, and I'll copy and paste this file to a new location. Oops, I'm not sharing my screen, am I? Okay, so I've opened up the file and I'm going to copy the .3dm file. That's a Rhino file. I'm going to copy that and paste it somewhere in my files so I know where to find it. So spring 2023. I'm going to make a new folder. I'll just paste it in there. So now I can just click on it, open with Rhino. Just give it a moment to open. So while that's opening, does anyone have any questions so far? All right, I'll take the silence as a no. Okay, so now the model has opened here. So here's my screen again. And if I zoom out, I see here in Rhino, just by opening that file, I have all of that site context without having to have modeled any of it. And I'll also show that in the top view. So if we look over at our layers over here, you'll see that everything has also been imported by layer. So I can toggle on and off my buildings, and maybe I'll change the color just so that it's a little bit easier to read. So blue. We have railways, which I don't know that they're, okay, so the railways are these lines. This is Broad Street. So those of you who are familiar with Philly and Philly transportation systems, that's the Broad Street subway line. Although that's below ground, so I don't think that's really necessary to my site information for now. So I am just going to turn off that layer. We have water, which I guess is just this little, I don't know what that is. Maybe it's a well or a fountain. I'm not sure. Let's turn off our buildings. And now we have our outlines, which are our roads. So let's rename that to roads. And of course, last but not least, we have our topography. And perhaps I didn't check my contours actually. Let's see. Every 4, okay. I guess 4 meters. This site, I guess, is pretty flat, so there's not much contours to be had here. But if I turn off all my other layers, you see here in the front view that there is some slight variation in the topography. Okay, that is how you bring in site context. You'll notice here, if I select my surface and I go to properties, that this is a mesh surface. And we talked about meshes briefly before and the difference between them and NURBS. If you want to change that to a NURB surface, you can use the command called mesh to NURB. And that will convert the mesh object into a NURB surface, the default type of surface that Rhino uses. So now I'll just go ahead and delete my mesh. And one thing that didn't come in was the contours. And for my site map, which everyone will be required to have a site map for their presentation, it's more than likely that you'll you'll need to have some contour lines. So if I have a pretty flat site and CAD Mapper only allows me to set my contours for 4 meters apart, that's probably way too much difference in elevation for this site. It's not going to show up with any contour lines because that is such a great change in elevation that doesn't happen on this very flat site. But as we said here before, this surface has a lot of, still has somewhat variation in slope and in texture. So how do we bring in additional contour lines? Well, there's a command called contour. And contour essentially allows us to take a surface and cut all of those, all of the contour lines, basically. So how do we use the contour command? So I've just typed in contour and hit enter. And now it's going to ask me to select my objects for contouring. So I'll select the object and hit enter. And now it's going to ask for a contour base plane, or yeah, contour plane base point. So when it asks for a base point, what that means is it's actually asking for any point that is below the surface. So if we're looking at a front view or a right view, any point that is below what is highlighted in yellow. So I'm going to click a point below, and now it's going to ask me for a direction perpendicular to the contour planes. So I want my contour planes to be, of course, left to right. So perpendicular to that would be straight up. So I'm just going to click any point above that surface. And now it's going to ask me for the distance between my contours. And I would say for this site, I think about 1 foot would be sufficient. So if I hit 1 foot, that's basically indicating to Rhino when it's creating these topography contour lines, each line is going to represent 1 foot in elevation change. So I'm going to hit enter. And you'll see here in my front and right view that there are a bunch of lines that you see here highlighted in yellow. And basically what that did is every foot, it sliced through this surface and created a contour line to represent that. So if I make a new layer, and we'll call this contours, and we'll make that red so we can see it, and I change my objects to that layer, you'll see here, now we have all of these contour lines without having to draw them out by hand. Just a simple command in Rhino. And now we'll turn on the rest of our information here. So now we have buildings and contour lines with basically little to no work. Any questions so far? Anyone excited about this? When I found out about this program, it was very exciting because the idea of not having to do any work was very, very nice. So if we have no more questions, the last thing I'll do is I will show you how to import the Rhino model that you're working on. So let's say that for the purpose of this project, I will allow you guys to pick a site that already has a building on it. So if you want to, I will allow you to basically take a building and delete it and, you know, pretend it was never there, so that you can place your your Rhino model, the Rhino model that you've been working on, onto that site. So I have here here's my other Rhino model. And I have modeled as a demo the Farnsworth house. So here's that model. I have that model saved as a different file, of course. So if I wanted to import this model into another model with my site context, how would I do that? What I'll need to do is back in this file with all the site context, I will need to go to File and Import. And now it's going to ask me where is the file I want to import. Oh, there it is, right there. Okay, so I'll hit open. And you'll see here that wherever my model was in the other file, it will pop up in the same location. So luckily I've kept mine near the origin point. And it has also brought in all of my layers. So I'm going to turn off my base images because I won't need that for this anymore. Actually, I'll probably just go ahead and delete that layer. Yes. And now I can go ahead and basically move my model onto my site. And of course, the Farnsworth is a pretty big house. So perhaps I'll delete some additional buildings. And let's say, let me go ahead and lock all of my, oops, forgot to lock this layer. Let's say this is how I want my building to sit on the site. Something like that. And now I have a building on a site with context all around it. All right. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to stop my